It is the early afternoon of June 4th, 1942, during the Battle of Midway. Japanese dive bombers pull away from an American aircraft carrier, leaving it burning, trailing heavy black smoke, and completely dead in the water. To the departing pilots, the massive warship is clearly knocked out of the fight. Yet, just a few hours later, a second Japanese strike group arrives. They find what appears to be a completely different, fully operational American carrier steaming at high speed. They attack immediately. But Japan had not found a second carrier. They had just attacked the exact same ship. The Japanese pilots were not fools, and they were not hallucinating. What they experienced was the result of one of the most astonishing feats of damage control in naval history. This is not the familiar story of Midway's codebreakers or the tactical maneuvers of high command. This is a story forged in the suffocating heat of flooded compartments, severed communication lines, and smoke-filled passageways deep inside the USS Yorktown. It is a grueling, frantic race against the clock, fought by ordinary sailors armed with wrenches, portable pumps, and fire hoses. They were trapped in a dying ship, battling out-of-control fires and ruptured boilers, fully aware that the enemy was already reloading for a second wave. Their survival depended entirely on an emergency, improvised resurrection of a warship that had just been bombed to a complete standstill. But by fighting to save their vessel, Yorktown's repair crews achieved something far more profound. They unwittingly orchestrated a massive strategic deception. By extinguishing the towering pillars of smoke, patching the shattered flight deck, and forcing the dead engines to turn the propellers once more, they altered the physical reality of the battlefield faster than Japanese intelligence could comprehend it. Without using camouflage or fake radio traffic, they changed the identity of their own ship simply by refusing to let it die. In the chaotic fog of a carrier battle, admirals are forced to make life-or-death decisions based solely on fleeting glimpses from their pilots. So how could an enemy strike the exact same aircraft carrier twice in a single afternoon and be absolutely certain they were attacking two completely separate targets? To understand how a single warship could fool an entire empire into believing it was two distinct targets, one must first recognize that the USS Yorktown had no business being at Midway at all. Just weeks prior, during the Battle of the Coral Sea, the carrier had suffered catastrophic damage. A Japanese bomb had penetrated the flight deck, detonating deep inside the aviation stores and tearing open the hull. Naval architects at Pearl Harbor inspected the torn steel and estimated it would take 3 full months in dry dock to make the ship seaworthy. The fleet was staring at a crippled asset, and Nimitz had zero margin for error. With the main Japanese fleet bearing down on the tiny atoll of Midway, the American command could not afford to lose a single flight deck. Nimitz gave the shipyard workers 72 hours. They didn't fix the ship by the book. They welded steel plates over gaping holes, bypassed shattered internal systems, and sailed out into the Pacific with shipyard workers still hammering away in the bilges. Yorktown arrived at Midway patched together with brute force, institutional willpower, and a ticking clock. This frantic arrival highlights the fundamental nature of 1942 carrier combat, a reality defined by profound blindness. In the age before satellite reconnaissance and real-time data feeds, a naval battle over the open ocean was fought in a dense fog of war. An admiral standing on a flag bridge could not look out a window and see the enemy fleet. He was essentially flying blind, forced to construct his entire mental model of the battlefield from fragmented, highly perishable clues. Scouts flying far ahead spotted distant white wakes or towering columns of smoke, but by the time their written reports were scribbled down, encoded, transmitted, and decoded back on the flagship, the tactical landscape had already shifted. Pilot debriefings were notoriously unreliable snapshots of chaos, colored by adrenaline, altitude, and poor visibility. In this environment, command decisions were acts of deduction made in the dark, relying on information that was often obsolete the moment it was spoken aloud. By the morning of June 4th, that fog of war had compressed into a crucible of unprecedented violence. The opening hours of the battle had already shattered the Imperial Japanese Navy's confident assumptions. Dive bombers from Enterprise and Yorktown had caught the Japanese carrier strike force at the exact moment their flight decks were crowded with fully armed and fueled planes preparing for a counterattack. In rapid succession, the Akagi, the Kaga, and the Soryu were reduced to blazing, uncontrollable wrecks. 3 magnificent fleet carriers of the Kido Butai, the spearhead of Japanese naval power, were burning out from the inside, their structural integrity compromised by secondary explosions and cascading fuel fires. For the Japanese High Command, the psychological shock was total. Yet, out of that burning disaster, a singular and desperate lifeline remained. Rear Admiral Tamon Yamaguchi, commanding from the surviving carrier Hiryu, found himself isolated with a fraction of his original strength. He had watched 3 sisters die in minutes, but he still possessed 1 intact flight deck and a burning imperative to strike back before the Americans could finish off his fleet. Yamaguchi did not have the luxury of a complete operational picture. He knew the Americans were out there, but he had no way of knowing the full extent of their disposition. His understanding of the battle was strictly shaped by incoming reports from his own surviving scouts and returning air crews, who brought back terrifying news of a major American carrier group lying directly in their path. The Hiryu was now the sole avenger of the pride of Japan, forced to launch counterstrikes into a vast, indifferent ocean based on information that was slipping out of date with every passing minute. Yamaguchi's staff had to weigh every fraction of intelligence with agonizing care, knowing that a single miscalculation would leave their last remaining carrier completely exposed. The air crews standing on the flight deck of the Hiryu were tense, disciplined, and utterly unaware of the miraculous engineering feat already underway miles away. They strapped into their aircraft, believing they were heading out to hunt down an isolated American target, completely blind to the fact that the ship waiting for them had already cheated death once that morning and was about to do it again. Shortly before noon, Admiral Yamaguchi unleashes his vengeance. From the deck of the Hiryu, 18 Aichi D-3A Val dive bombers and a lethal escort of 6 Zero fighters roar into the sky, commanded by Lieutenant Michio Kobayashi. They have no precise coordinates for the American fleet, but they do not need them. By simply following the returning American strike planes, Kobayashi's squadron navigates a direct path back to Task Force 17. Down below, the USS Yorktown is steaming at 28 knots, actively recovering its own aircraft, when the ship's radar operator spots the incoming threat just 32 miles out. The American response is immediate and violent. The carrier's combat air patrol of F-4F Wildcat fighters vectors out to intercept, hitting the Japanese formation hard and shredding bombers before they can even initiate their dives. But the Japanese naval aviators of 1942 are some of the most disciplined and combat-hardened pilots on Earth. Through a chaotic swirl of dogfights and falling aircraft, a handful of dive bombers break through the fighter screen. They tip their wings and plunge into a terrifying near-vertical dive. Waiting for them is a solid wall of anti-aircraft fire. 5-inch shells detonate in black puffs of shrapnel, while glowing tracers from heavy cannons and machine guns reach up from Yorktown's decks. It is not enough. Pushing through the relentless flak, the Japanese pilots release their payloads at dangerously low altitudes. 3 armor-piercing bombs find their mark in rapid succession. The first bomb strikes the flight deck just aft of the island's superstructure. It punches through the steel and explodes in the hangar deck below, severing vital communication cables and igniting fierce fires. Minutes later, a second bomb pierces the flight deck and detonates directly inside the ship's smokestack. The concussive blast violently ruptures the boiler uptakes, instantly filling the lower engineering spaces with choking, blinding smoke. A third bomb tears through the forward elevator, penetrating deep into the lower decks, before exploding in a storage room, sparking yet another raging fire near secured aviation fuel lines. For a modern fleet carrier, fire is a deadly threat, but the second bomb delivers an even more catastrophic blow. By rupturing the uptakes, the explosion suffocates the furnaces in the boiler rooms. The fire rooms fill with toxic black smoke, forcing the engineering crews to secure the burners to prevent a catastrophic blowout. Without the boilers, the massive 19,000-ton warship instantly loses steam pressure. The rhythmic thumping of the great turbines goes quiet. The propellers slow their frantic churning. Slowly, agonizingly, the Yorktown sheds its speed. From a battle-ready 28 knots, the enormous vessel coasts down to a complete dead stop in the middle of the ocean. High above, the surviving Japanese aviators wrench their dive bombers out of their attack runs and bank sharply to assess their work. The visual evidence below them is unmistakable and absolute. The Yorktown is paralyzed. A massive column of thick, oily black smoke stretches hundreds of feet into the sky, marking the carrier like a gravestone. It is trailing no wake. It cannot launch aircraft. It cannot maneuver. To the experienced eyes of the Japanese pilots, the physics of naval warfare dictate a simple truth. A carrier that is dead in the water and burning uncontrollably is a carrier that has been definitively removed from the board. Lieutenant Kobayashi's surviving planes turn their noses westward, beginning the long flight back to the Hiryu. As they disappear over the horizon, they transmit a triumphant radio report back to Admiral Yamaguchi's flag bridge. They confirm exactly what the Japanese high command needs to hear. They have found an American aircraft carrier. They have hammered it with multiple direct hits, and they have left it crippled, burning, and dead in the water. As far as the Imperial Japanese Navy is concerned, carrier number 1 is finished. When the last Japanese dive bomber vanishes over the horizon, the true battle for the USS Yorktown begins. Above deck, the carrier appears to be a dying beast, motionless beneath a massive column of black smoke. But below decks, in the claustrophobic, pitch-black corridors, a highly organized army of damage control crews immediately springs into action. This is not a shipyard repair where workers can leisurely assess structural integrity. This is a violent, chaotic war fought in darkness, smoke, and heat, with the absolute certainty that the enemy will return. The Japanese bombs have finished their grim work. The work of Yorktown's crew is just starting. Deep inside the ship, the first priority is isolating the catastrophic fires sparked by the hangar deck bomb. Thick, acrid smoke instantly chokes the narrow passageways, blinding the repair parties. Men rely on touch, memory, and grueling discipline. Working in extreme heat, damage control teams manually haul heavy hoses through the dark, isolating the flames away from the most volatile spaces on the ship, the high-octane aviation fuel lines, and the main ammunition magazines. They establish defensive boundaries, sealing watertight doors and cooling the bulkheads with salt water, ensuring that the fire cannot leap from compartment to compartment. Simultaneously, high above them on the crippled flight deck, another frantic effort is underway. The first bomb had torn a massive, jagged crater straight through the wooden deck, rendering it utterly useless for launching or recovering aircraft. Repair crews swarm the impact zone, stripping away the smoking debris. They drag heavy wooden planks and sheets of steel across the deck, hastily patching the gaping hole. Every second counts, and the repair must be strong enough to withstand the brutal impact of a landing fighter plane. But the most critical crisis unfolds deep within the bowels of the carrier, inside the engineering spaces. The second bomb had shattered the boiler uptakes, extinguishing the fires in 5 of the ship's 6 boilers. Without steam, the Yorktown has no propulsion, no electrical power, and no ability to communicate. The fire rooms are suffocated in thick black smoke, making it impossible for the engineering crew to breathe, let alone relight the massive furnaces. In total darkness, operating entirely by feel and sheer willpower, engineers painstakingly bypass the ruptured uptakes. They manually reroute the exhaust vents, allowing the choking smoke to finally clear. Then, one by one, they carefully relight the surviving boilers. Meanwhile, miles away on the bridge of the Hiryu, Admiral Yamaguchi receives the triumphant radio report from his returning dive bombers. The news acts like a shot of adrenaline to the battered Japanese command. The report is clear and unequivocal. One American fleet carrier has been left burning heavily, entirely dead in the water, effectively neutralized. Believing that one of the major American threats has been eliminated, Yamaguchi immediately orders the launch of his second strike. This time, he sends his lethal B-5N Kate torpedo bombers, commanded by Lieutenant Joichi Tominaga. Their mission is to hunt down and destroy any remaining American carriers. Back on the Yorktown, the damage control effort is a testament to American naval training, strict compartmentalization, and relentless discipline. The ship is designed with redundancy. If one system fails, another can take its place, provided the crew acts fast enough. And Yorktown's crew acts with astonishing speed. They do not wait for orders. They execute procedures they have drilled 100 times before. Within an incredibly short span of time, the impossible begins to happen. The damage control teams successfully suffocate the worst of the fires, dramatically reducing the massive column of black smoke that had marked the ship. The hastily repaired flight deck is cleared of debris. Most importantly, deep in the engineering spaces, the relit boilers begin generating steam pressure. The massive turbines slowly start to turn. The ship's electrical power flickers back to life. The motionless, burning wreck the Japanese dive bombers had left behind slowly begins to move. The propellers churn the water, and the Yorktown gradually builds speed, reaching an impressive 19 knots. The carrier is bleeding internally, severely wounded, and fighting to stay afloat, but outwardly, the transformation is stunning. The fires are under control, the heavy smoke is gone, the ship is underway, and flight operations have resumed. To the naked eye, the USS Yorktown once again looks like a fully operational American aircraft carrier. And right at that exact moment, the second wave of Japanese torpedo bombers breaks through the clouds. Lieutenant Joichi Tominaga scans the vast expanse of the Pacific from the cockpit of his Nakajima torpedo bomber. Leading the second Japanese strike wave, his mission is defined entirely by the intelligence report he received before takeoff. He knows that his predecessor has already neutralized one American fleet carrier. That first target was left gutted, burning uncontrollably, and completely dead in the water. Tominaga's sole objective is to locate and destroy any remaining undamaged American flight decks. Breaking through the scattered cloud cover, the Japanese aviators spot the sweeping white wake of a massive warship. Tominaga peers down at the target. What he sees completely defies the description of a crippled vessel. The carrier in his sights is slicing through the ocean at nearly 20 knots. There is no towering pillar of black smoke marking it as a casualty. Its flight deck appears intact, and fresh combat air patrols of American Wildcats are already peeling out of the sky to intercept his bombers. In the high-speed environment of an aerial assault, Tominaga has only seconds to process this visual information. He must cross-reference what his eyes are telling him with the established facts of the battlefield. The logic of naval warfare in 1942 leaves no room for miracles. A warship that has suffered catastrophic boiler failure and lost all propulsion does not simply restart its engines and steam away 2 hours later. A ship burning from the inside out does not hide its scars before the afternoon. The deduction is instantaneous and entirely rational. Because a dead ship cannot resurrect itself, the vessel maneuvering below them cannot be the same ship that was attacked earlier. It must be untouched. It must be a completely different target. The Imperial Japanese Navy has found carrier number 2. Tomonaga signals his squadrons. The heavy torpedo bombers split into their attack formations, dropping their noses toward the ocean surface. This is the cruelest, most tragic paradox of the battle. Deep inside the hull, the American damage control teams had just pulled off an engineering masterpiece. They had suffocated the infernos, reconnected the power grids, and forced the turbines to turn again. They had won their desperate race against the clock. But by doing their jobs so flawlessly, they had inadvertently erased the very evidence that would have saved them. Had the USS Yorktown remained a dark, motionless, burning wreck, the Japanese pilots might have bypassed it entirely, conserving their precious aerial torpedoes for an active operational threat. Instead, the sheer brilliance and speed of the American repair crews wiped away the visual signature of a dying ship. In their refusal to surrender the vessel, they effectively painted a fresh, irresistible target on their own hull. By saving the Yorktown, they disguised her as a brand new enemy. Unaware of the phantom identity of their target, the Japanese pilots level out just feet above the ocean swells. They brace against the sudden, violent eruptions of anti-aircraft fire, holding their aircraft steady as they line up their lethal torpedo runs against the broadside of a ship they are absolutely certain is a fresh kill. The Nakajima torpedo bombers dropped to less than 50 feet above the rolling Pacific, flying straight into a blinding wall of anti-aircraft fire. The ocean surface erupts into geysers as American gunners throw everything they have at the incoming planes. Aboard the Yorktown, Captain Elliot Buckmaster orders the rudder hard over, desperately trying to comb the torpedo wakes. The massive carrier heels sharply, successfully dodging the first spreads. But the Japanese execute a flawless anvil attack, boxing the ship in from multiple angles. There is simply no water left to maneuver. 2 Type 91 aerial torpedoes slam into the carrier's port side in rapid succession. Unlike the localized fiery punch of a dive bomber, a torpedo strike is a catastrophic, seismic event. The sheer kinetic shock wave lifts the 19,000-ton vessel, whipping the flight deck violently and throwing men off their feet. Below the waterline, the explosions rip the steel hull wide open. The ocean does not negotiate. Millions of gallons of seawater instantly roar into the port fuel tanks, the forward generator room, and the lower engineering spaces. The very heart of the ship, the boilers that the damage control teams had just sacrificed everything to relight, is swallowed by the sea. The lights flicker and die. The ventilation fans grind to a halt. The rhythmic pulsing of the turbines ceases permanently. Within minutes, the Yorktown loses all power, sheds her speed, and goes dead in the water for the second time that afternoon. But this time, the wound is mortal. Deprived of electrical power, the massive internal pumps cannot be activated to counter-flood the starboard compartments. The carrier immediately begins to heel to port. The list worsens with terrifying speed, settling at a severe 26 degrees. The flight deck slants so drastically that men cannot stand upright without clinging to the lifelines. Down in the suffocating darkness of the lower decks, the damage control crews face a devastating psychological blow. Just 2 hours ago, they had achieved the impossible. They had choked on black smoke, bypassed shattered uptakes, and wrestled their dying ship back to life. They had won their desperate race against the clock. Yet it was precisely that miraculous victory that had drawn this new wave of destruction upon them. Now, with the water rising relentlessly in the dark and the ship groaning under the strain of its own shifting weight, the bitter reality sets in. No amount of training, discipline, or sheer willpower can weld a torn hull back together underwater. The threat of an imminent catastrophic capsize is undeniable. Recognizing that his crew has done everything humanly possible, Captain Buckmaster makes the only choice left. He issues the order to abandon ship. The men who had just fought so fiercely to save the Yorktown are now forced to slide down ropes into the oil-slicked Pacific, leaving their resurrected fortress behind. High above the sprawling evacuation, the surviving Japanese aviators bank away through the drifting smoke. Looking down, they do not see the heartbreaking end of a grueling struggle for survival. They see only the validation of their tactical logic. A pristine American carrier has been hunted down, torpedoed, and left sinking. Adjusting their throttles for the long flight back to the Hiryu, Lieutenant Tomonaga's radio man keys his transmitter. He sends a jubilant report across the Pacific to Admiral Yamaguchi. They have successfully engaged and mortally wounded a second enemy flight deck. Back on the flagship Hiryu, Admiral Yamaguchi receives this second, triumphant transmission. In the isolated high-stakes environment of the Japanese flag bridge, the incoming intelligence aligns perfectly into a coherent tactical picture. The first wave, using dive bombers, reported leaving an American aircraft carrier burning and utterly paralyzed. The second wave, using torpedo planes, reported hunting down a fully operational, high-speed carrier, striking it with torpedoes and leaving it rapidly sinking. When these two distinct reports are placed side by side on a map, the conclusion is inescapable. The Imperial Japanese Navy has successfully tracked down and eliminated two separate American fleet carriers in a single afternoon. If you had been standing on the bridge of the Hiryu, reading those dispatch logs, the logic would have been unassailable. If you had seen the Yorktown at noon, a motionless pillar of smoke, and then seen it again at 3 o'clock, racing across the waves, you too would have deduced that they were two entirely different ships. It was an error born not of stupidity, but of the limitations of information in wartime. The intelligence picture presented to the Japanese command was entirely rational, yet fundamentally wrong. The USS Yorktown's crew had not utilized sophisticated camouflage, deployed decoy vessels, or generated fake radio traffic to misdirect the enemy. They had achieved a far more profound deception simply by working faster than the enemy's assumptions. They had repaired catastrophic combat damage at a pace that the Japanese considered physically impossible, proving that the reality of the battlefield changes faster than the intelligence reports trying to capture it. And even after the torpedoes struck, the Yorktown still refused to die on the enemy's schedule. The massive carrier did not capsize that afternoon. It lingered for days, stubbornly afloat, while American salvage crews returned, set up portable pumps, and attempted to tow the battered hull home. It was not until June 7th, 3 days after the initial dive bomber attack, that a Japanese submarine, the I-168, finally managed to slip through the destroyer screen and deliver the fatal torpedo blows that sent the ship to the bottom. The Yorktown did not survive Midway, but its ultimate loss was eclipsed by the strategic chaos it had sown simply by surviving long enough to change the enemy's mind. Japan thought it had found and crippled a second American carrier in the vast Pacific. What it had actually found was the first one refusing to stay dead.